So today I want to rap a little bit about a couple characters that are near and dear to my heart, man. And I've been thinking about some of the similarities between the both of them. I'm talking about Gohan and Trunks. And I want to talk a little bit about the role of parental expectations in both of these characters and kind of living under the shadows of their fathers and the way that that kind of influenced both of them differently and put them on separate paths. So just kind of opening up, thinking about the shadow that Gohan was living under from the moment he was born. Imagine being born and like your dad is that guy, bro. He's the strongest, the toughest, the most handsome, the savior. Everybody depends on this dude. And then you come into the world just trying to figure out who you are, and you don't really get a chance to do that because you're crushed under the weight of the expectation of who you're supposed to be almost immediately. And this is something that both Gohan and Trunks both end up dealing with, but they end up kind of working through it in different ways. Now, Gohan has this humongous burden of potential, right? The word potential is almost synonymous with Gohan. You can barely talk about his character without using it. And the moment he's introduced, he's not just a kid. He's a prodigy. He's the son of Goku, and everybody keeps talking about how he even has more potential than his dad, and all of this about his identity is just projected onto him. And the wildest part is it's not even really his pops doing it, but the culture, society, everybody that he's surrounded by within his community has these expectations about what Gohan's identity is supposed to be. He starts off from rip having expectations placed upon him. Piccolo, Krillin, Bulma, Master Roshi, from the moment they laid eyes on Gohan, they talk about like who his old man is, like what a fighter, that he's gonna grow up to be. You even after a certain point have villains gassing him up like, yeah, ain't you Goku's son? You supposed to be able to throw some hands. What you doing? He can't catch a break from anybody, right? And the internal conflict that this would create in you, right? Like being somebody who doesn't even get a chance to craft your own identity, but we find out later that Gohan doesn't want problems. This man wants peace, but he's told that it's his destiny to get out there and throw the ones, that he can't get away from it. He got a training camp when he was like still a toddler. He was like 4 years old or something crazy when a demon had him out in the woods fighting for his life, beating the hell out of dinosaurs and all that kind of garbage, man. And it's interesting when you think about the way that Gohan's rage pops up, because his fury often isn't the result of like this love for battle or anything like that, but it almost comes out of obligation. He doesn't do it for the want of a fight. He does it for the want of a normal life, right? When there's an obstacle that's going to interfere with his family's life, or there's a severe injustice that occurs to somebody that he cares about, that's when his power seems to poke through. It's almost out of like this moral obligation more so than this saying heritage thing and all of that. And I think that that's interesting to take a look at. And I think about his pops' influence on him, and there's that whole meme about Goku being a bad father, and I've even made that joke myself. And to me, it doesn't paint necessarily the full picture, because I don't think that he's a bad father, right? It's not like he was abusive or he told Gohan that who he is isn't good enough, or did any of those things that you think of when it comes to somebody just being an absolute deadbeat ass terrible father. But Goku's problem is that he just kind of like wasn't necessarily present. You know, he missed large chunks of Gohan's life from either being dead or throwing hands and everything, right? And don't get me wrong, it was for like a greater good. It was for a big purpose. It was in order to protect his son and everything like that, but his presence wasn't there. And that's where you kind of get those memes of like Piccolo being his dad and everything like that. But Goku's presence in his life is kind of inconsistent. And one thing that really gets kind of showcased, especially in the Android and Cell saga, is that when Goku does show up, he doesn't necessarily relate to Gohan on the level of this being his son. You know, as somebody that I love, at this young person trying to figure out his identity and his own values and what he wants in the world, he relates to Gohan on the level of being a warrior, because that's what he understands. He understands fighting. He understands getting in the mix, throwing hands. He like beating each other to death and like testing each other's limits and everything. But he's not speaking Gohan's language. Gohan is a warrior by necessity, not by choice. And that's like a fundamental different place than where Goku is coming from. And so there's this rift. And this brings up a really pivotal moment where Gohan ends up finally being able to choose his own path. You know, I think about at the end of the Cell saga when Gohan is in there just getting pulled apart by Cell, and then Piccolo wants to slap the taste out of Goku's mouth. Like, is this what you wanted? Like, do you see what you put your son into? He's not you, Goku. He's not built like you. And for the first time, it clicks for Goku. He recognizes the potential within his son, but for the longest, he hadn't necessarily been seeing Gohan himself. He had been seeing the expectations of who he thought Gohan could be, but not seeing his son himself. And that experience of watching Gohan go through it and Piccolo bringing that directly to his attention made him finally wake up a little bit, man. And I think that was a huge moment for Goku's character, and we see in the future that he's all aboard his son being a scholar. You know, of course he wants him to train and he thinks very highly of him and his power, but he doesn't ever tell him that his life path is a bad one or anything like that. And I got a lot of respect for Goku as a character for that, man. I think that that's amazing. And this comes into a big debate about Gohan's character, you know, where people crap on him from walking away from it all. People hate him for it, for not being the warrior that he quote unquote should be. But like on the level of like character development and psychology, that's the best thing that could have happened for Gohan. If he would have remained a warrior, that would have been inauthentic. That would have actually been the lie. He becomes a scholar. He becomes a father. He allows himself to be the man that he wants to be on his terms and no one else's. You know, and of course his mom had a big influence with him, like hitting the books, and like he would fight back and then sometimes be involved. But ultimately he decided that this is the path that he wanted to walk, almost the path of a normal earthling with a family that he protects. And this is purely him, not him having to live up to the mythos of Goku, of his Saiyan heritage, being able to let all of that go and just being an individual. He's no longer trying to live up to anybody else's path. But it comes with its own struggles. You know, he struggles with guilt a lot of the times because the life they live, he keeps getting pulled back into it. But when I look at it from a character perspective, as annoying as Gohan's inconsistency can be, he's kind of a tragic character that's torn in between being himself and being sincere and authentic versus doing what's demanded of him and having to live a life where he's forced to throw the ones even when he's not necessarily built for it. He's built like that. And then we got the homie Trunks, which is like a whole other can of worms with his father's situation, man. So if we're talking like future Trunks, like he grew up without a pops, right? Like if we're talking about this version of him, this man is born into a hellscape, bro. He lives in the Berserk and Attack on Titan universe. He lives in Gotham and it's trash. His dad is dead, you know, so like his dad really is a myth. All he has is the stories about who this guy is from his mom and like the memories that have been left behind. So he's coming up in a situation where he has no expectations really from that fatherly standpoint. There's nobody to praise him, to admonish him, no one to support him and kind of help guide his path whatsoever. So there's like this sense of longing there for him. Well, and I shouldn't say anybody, right? Because what ends up happening is future Gohan kind of fulfills that role for him, and he helps to step in place where his father couldn't. But by the time he like gets to that age where he's becoming a warrior and things like that, man, there's a lot of things that have already been set in stone developmentally, man. Like there's ways that he thinks and all of that, and that wound is still there even despite having Gohan's presence. And so there's a difference between him and the Gohan that we know in that way, right? Where there's kind of this pain, but also this freedom for him to develop in a different kind of way. What ends up change in his developmental path, right, is that homie is kind of carrying the weight of the world because he lives in the apocalypse and everything. He's not necessarily free to choose his identity in a healthy way. He doesn't have time for any self-doubt or curiosity or self-discovery. Big homie shaped by trauma. You know, he lives in an inherently traumatic environment. Everybody that he's known and loved is dead, that his mom's known and loved is dead. The world is just simply not the same. Trunks' personality gets shaped by this need to survive. He has to step up to the plate, and he really almost doesn't even get a chance to be a kid. You know, he almost goes through like a parentification thing where he's made to take on these adult responsibilities and be the head of the household in some ways far before his time because of what the environment and everything demands of him. You know, it's not a Bulma being a bad parent or abusive or anything like that, but it's the reality of the world that both of them occupy. He has to become hyper mature. You know, a lot of people talk about Trunks' coolness, and I talk about him myself because he's legitimately a cool and mature character who makes decisions that the other Z Warriors don't make because of the future that he's coming from. He does not play games. He will smoke you right away and not think anything of it. But that's coming from a place of him having to mature before his time. You know, I think about the beauty of Kid Trunks versus Future Trunks, right? And about how different they are because Kid Trunks had a chance to be a kid. You know, he's got the opportunity to live in a world that's relatively safe, being surrounded by people that love him, and that's something that Future Trunks didn't get. And you see this huge gulf in personality and maturity between the both of them, and Trunks' maturity was thrust upon him. He almost has to develop this hero complex in order to survive and make it in the world that he now occupies, man. He's always waiting for the next crisis. He's got to be like hyper vigilant and on edge because you never know like what's going to happen or when the androids are going to show up, and you have to be on guard at all times. And then you have this meeting, right? He goes to the future and he finally meets his dad, and this being a whirlwind of emotions when he actually meets the person of myth who his father actually is and everything. He wants to connect with his dad so bad. He wants to find some kind of emotional bond between the both of them because he's been longing for this, man. Somebody that is strong, that can be a pillar, that's trustworthy, that can help guide him through the chaos of what his world looks like. But he gets Vegeta. And Vegeta at this time we know is kind of a mess, man. He's at the height of his Saiyan pride and hubris. He's off that Super Saiyan pack, and he views emotions as weak, you know, and Trunks's lack of hot-headedness, you know, his deliberateness in which he makes decisions. He sees that gentleness as soft, as something to be insulted or made fun of or eradicated, more so than the wisdom that it is, and being able to respect the situation that his son is coming from and how different from it, and how different from his own experience that Trunks' life really is. And then you have my man Future Trunks kind of getting double traumatized, right? Because he's got this wound from a father that isn't present, and then through wild circumstances he's able to go back in time and meet this father, and then that idealized image of the man who he had hoped that this individual would be is immediately crushed, man. He was literally gonna let his wife and son get nuked at one point. Like, y'all remember when like Future Trunks had to come and save Bulma and the baby? He had to come save himself because Vegeta was just on that type of trash timing where he cared nothing for his family or these adult responsibilities. He was a complete hothead at this point, man. He was all about throwing hands and in the fight and like maintaining that ego. And so Trunks is just left with this destroyed image of the man that he had hoped his father would be versus that reality, and trying to process that. And there's a points early on in the arc where he tries to compensate by meeting his father's standards, you know, by trying to be the type of Saiyan that his father would have liked. So he shows up and trains and fights and tries to take on these attitudes that Vegeta might approve of and everything. But Vegeta, and I go back to this moment a lot, but the hyperbolic time chamber situation where him and his father could have grown so much together. And I think that moment is really symbolic of their relationship as a whole, where Vegeta's guard was so up at this point, where he was just not in a place internally to be able to communicate properly with anybody, that he was working through his own wounds, that he, in a place where they have damn near infinite time, didn't have it in him to properly utilize it with his own son, and how far they could have come together. But there's this distance between them. There's this mental distance that shows itself time and time again. And Trunks ends up resolving his problems in a very different way than Gohan did, right? I think Trunks's resolution to like this his issues with his father comes in that situation with Cell, you know, where his dad was big tripping. The moment that Trunks saw that he was really about to let this dude transform, he could not believe it. He thought about what his future looked like, and the idea of his dad letting an android that was even more powerful than the one that completely wrecked his existence just willingly transform, it was too much. And it was at that moment where Trunks goes from seeking the validation of his father into becoming his own man, and is like, I will throw hands with you if I have to, if it means not letting this future come to pass. And I love that moment for him. It was him just blasting his dad away, and even if he did get dealt with by Cell and everything, by going into Broly mode and all that, the main point is that he found his own voice at that time and really began walking the path of becoming his own man and everything. And he returns to his own future confident, like emotionally balanced and everything. And that came from him getting rid of that piece of him that needed to find his dad's approval, but he was able to forgive, right? He met his dad and was able to forgive him for all of his flaws. You know, he saw Vegeta as the man that he actually was, and instead of leaving with disappointment and resentment, he was able to accept reality, that this is just a human being. He's not a myth, and like, I've created this image, this fantasy of like who I wanted to encounter, and Vegeta ain't it. But that's not necessarily a bad thing either. He's got his own strengths, and although his pride can get on my nerves, I understand it because I got pride too, you know. And just being able to meet his father on that level of man to man, you know, this mutual understanding, and then being able to leave off on cool terms with his dad, even as emotionally distant as he is at this point in the story, showing up for his departure and everything, and being able to wave him off. It shows that he's learned something from his interactions with Trunks as well, you know. And Trunks took that experience and has allowed it to let him become a better person, man. Not become this resentful and bitter individual, but take both things that his father does well and not so well and integrate them into his own personality, and let that crap go, you know. Not let that desire for validation run his life anymore, or that desire to not be like this guy run his life anymore, and instead walk his own path by figuring out what he wants and what's actually significant to him. And so kind of ending it, man, I think it's amazing the way that the story kind of showcases different ways to work through this kind of problem and everything, right? Where I guess healing or getting through some of this stuff doesn't always mean that you got to get like this big apology from the person that you feel like hurts you or anything like that, but it's being able to figure out what's important and walking your own path and like becoming a whole individual, even if that wound doesn't get figured out in exactly the way that you want. You know, in the case of Gohan, there's still that internal battle that he feels, and like some of those pressures and all that to be a certain way, but he knows fundamentally that he's a different man from his father, that it's okay to be who and what he is, and not, while he wants to step up to the plate and do what he can, he has to let those expectations of being Goku's kid go and figure out who Gohan is and what Gohan actually wants, and Gohan wants to be an academic and have a family. Those are the things that are his priorities, not necessarily testing the limits of his power. And the same thing with Trunks, having to let resentment go, that myth that he created of Vegeta and these other people in his head, and then coming to grips with the reality of how flawed these people actually are when he does meet them, but being able to resolve that in a way that doesn't make him this hateful person, but rather acceptance, and allowing him to let some of that stuff go so he can forgive and mature in a way that isn't completely ruled by anger and hate. It's okay to step away from legacy, you know, and to like walk your own path, to build the future on the foundation of what you actually find important, rather than the ghost of who and what came before, man. So like that's where I'm gonna leave it, man. That's what I want to talk about. Let me know how y'all feel in the comments, man. Once again, Dragon Ball proven to be an infinite well of potential topics to talk about, and things kind of going deeper than they may look on the surface. I appreciate all the channel members, man. Y'all are the best. I love going through the comments. Y'all bring up really cool conversation, and for any of y'all in the audience, for $5, man, exclusive videos, early access to new drops, and just a cool community. Some really just awesome people to be around that got love for the stuff that we're talking about over here. So please do me a favor, man, like, subscribe, share the video, all that fun stuff, and I'll be looking forward to chopping it up with y'all in the comments, man. So I'll see y'all here soon in the next video.